Welcome back, venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am Emar, and together with Tauros, we bring the topic of Sprache im Bildrahmen, the language in visual novels. From ancient writings to doublespeak. Tell us, Tauros, all about the role of language in VNs.
Yes, because it's not just as direct as saying, what language that a visual novel is written in, like whether the original language was Japanese or, translated to English, or we have ourselves an OEL VN. No, it's I want to talk more about the aspect of language within a visual novel, not entirely so much the meta aspect, although that is one part of it itself. Basically, the language as it's spoken or presented in the visual novel. Like, when we read a title, we just assume everyone is speaking in English because we're reading English. But if we have a translated title, like it was first written in Japanese, and the Japanese developers and the authors and the readers are all, hearing the Japanese characters speak Japanese because they're reading Japanese. But when it's translated into English, now we have to, well, it's not that we have to, it's we imagine the characters speaking English. And most of the time this isn't an issue, but there are some times where we get some funny little scenarios. Plus, sometimes language is used as a narrative device. And so, thanks to image editing, sometimes there's things like CGs involving Japanese writings, and when it gets translated into English, that gets conveyed into English instead. But sometimes it's not that simple and clean. And so it's an interesting topic, and there's more wrinkles to this than you'd think.
Especially since how Japanese work. I'm by no means expert. I barely could do the intro with slight German, but with Japanese, you have the kanji that can represent a word. So this works really well for UI. But now translated that one character to a word menu, send or something like that, and now suddenly you have issues, right? So it can mess up translation efforts. So I am always appreciating the effort the editors go through to have all the images correctly translated and the UI correctly aligned. So on that note, I also want to bring up the important aspect that we'll be talking about, both, like you said, sort of language from its meta aspect of the suspense of disbelief, that obviously I'm reading in English to understand that they are not speaking English but rather Japanese, and to some degree subconsciously I understand that by hearing the Japanese yet reading English. But hilariously enough, and one of the pictures running the background is from Grisaya, you are reading perfect English that that has its role to convey Japanese, but then you need to introduce a broken English. So deliberately you read a different kind of English, not to also forget about Japanese region-specific accent that often requires the English to be of a different kind as well, like an old English, to give a different vibe than the regular English.
Because, you have Kisaya, which is about, to put it simply, it is about a group of high school students. And they're all speaking in Japanese, and you can hear the voice-acted lines talking in Japanese, but you're reading the whole script in English. And then you get to that funny scene where the students, the Japanese students, are trying to improve their English-speaking skills to hilariously awful results. It's like you've been hearing all these characters, and now you suddenly hear the English of, like, you like a fish? And it's like, it's all very slow and pieced together what you'd expect of someone trying to learn a new language. And to me, it's very jarring. Because, like, in the scene itself, it's funny. And you can always, it's about those miscommunications of people trying to speak different languages and stuff. But it's more of when you take a step back, it kind of blows the illusion of reading this visual novel, you know? It's everyone is talking in Japanese and it's supposed to be read in a different language, but now when the characters are making it a point of, oh, it's this fantastical English, the language that the English reader has been reading in this whole time, but now we need to pretend that the script doesn't know how the characters talk. And it's just too many layers to separate out. And it's like you have to like selectively be aware that it's Japanese, but you're not reading Japanese, you're reading English, and the characters are Japanese, and now they're reading English, but now they don't know how to say English. There's too many layers involved. There's too many suspensions of disbelief, you know?
Yeah, true. I get that. Like I said, especially then you go Kansai region that has its own variant of Japanese language, or kind of slightly different. Then you need to pick a subset or maybe a variant of English to also convey that this is a different Japanese presented by a different English.
Yeah, I mean, that's more of just translation thing, because, there's no one-to-one translation stuff, and it's just about making the best of what you got.
I agree.
Yeah.
This is somewhat similar to what we were talking about, in which you had to introduce a broken English to still the characters trying to do English while your translation is in English already.
Exactly. That's the part where now it's just, okay, I don't know how I'm supposed to read this and not just immediately, double think my own brain of what's going on in this fictional story. Because, like, on the other hand, you have something like Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, where you have this new character introduced, Athena Sykes, and in the Japanese version, which is taking place in Japan, she studied abroad in America. And so here she is in Japan for this setting, and she peppers her speech with English, like, okay, and let's do this. Now, you can't really do that in the English version, because that one, it infamously, it's taking place in Los Angeles. And since they're in America, with her deal, they changed it to where she studied abroad in Europe. And so whenever she talks, she'll pepper her words with some German or Spanish or French sayings.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And honestly, I prefer that. That works out a lot better. Because if you're reading this, even if you know it's translated, it still stays consistent with the language you're reading it in, the way the characters are talking, and just the logistics of the story itself. Like with Grisaya, it's such a jarring... You have to admit that something is not right with the way that you are interacting with this story. But in a sense where it's been, localized, like with the Ace Attorney series, it's all completely consistent. The only way you would know it's different is that if you just know that the Japanese version, it's something else. And I mean, if you're going to dig around into a game's development, well, that's what's going to happen. And that still doesn't ruin your current enjoyment,
Yeah, I wonder how part of it is the fact that in Grisaya, they are speaking those lines and you hear the broken English. So you cannot substitute by, I don't know, broken French in that part.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, the Ace Attorney doesn't have voice acting. Well, I mean, it does, but not for every line like it does for a visual novel like Grisaya. So, I mean, that is one of the ways in which it's easier for them, yeah.
Yeah, they could sneak in such an approach.
Mm-hmm. It's one less, I guess, constraint tying down any variance with the script.
True. Yeah. But that's just one of the aspects how language has a role within stories themselves, but more specifically the end, because that's what we were talking about. And another one is, and this is something that keeps coming back to me, is how they portrayed And I have two examples. One, how they portrayed Westerners speaking and Easterners speaking in Muramasa. It always trips me up how your entire UI changes to accommodate. Now it's Westerners speaking, so they speak in horizontal windows. And now Japanese characters are speaking and they speak in vertical windows. Like, what? The UI itself rotates to accommodate. That's such a unique take on it. And the UI itself had to be slightly enlarged. Specifically, I talk about the vertical one to accommodate for larger words in English on average. You cannot just put single characters as Muramasa was written from up to bottom. They had to accommodate it, but still you have that weird transition how the window rotates. And that's a very unique approach. I've never seen that in any other VM, how they specifically prepared a different UI to sell that. And importantly, okay, this is also the point. When you have a Japanese character listening in on Westerners, speaking in Westerners, that person doesn't understand the dialect. Even though you as a reader, you understand everything because it's in single concise language. But for the purposes of their dialogue, they are speaking either the Western language or the Eastern language. And the UI shows which one it is at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always the danger of like watching a movie or reading a book or something where the author puts in some cool dialogue in a foreign language just to be all, mysterious about it. But if you happen to understand that language, you're like, oh, okay, I just discovered some information that I wasn't supposed to learn. Oops.
I mean, the way I describe that approach is similar to how authors, specifically in books like a fantasy book, introduce, common language, the common tongue that a lot of races or inhabitants know. But there are regional dialects or certain country language that that has a different vocabulary, right? And the author in such a book will write, okay, this is a sentence spoken in this language. So they have to specify this sentence has been spoken in this language. Otherwise, if it's not mentioned, it is presumed to be the default one everybody understands. A very convenient way that fantasy authors tend to skirt around the issue of if you create a fantasy world, how do you solve the language barrier? And they just say, oh yeah, there is common that everybody knows because it's so common.
Mm-hmm. And just here's my made up language of gibberish.
Yeah, the gibberish language.
Yep. It's really funny you mentioned that about fantasy because I remember there was one visual novel called Aeon no Acelia. Like, what is it? Spirit of the Eternity Sword, I think. Our main character gets isekai'd into a fantasy world. And this was before the whole isekai boom or whatever, so they were the ones being original with it. This was like 2010.
Okay, hipster before it was cool, okay?
And he's in a fantasy world with like swords and magic and all that. And the characters are speaking some fantasy language that he obviously does not understand. And the first chapter, or I guess extended prologue or whatever, mostly consists of one of the heroines teaching this main character the fantasy language. And the poor VA is speaking in this made-up language the entire time.
Oh, God.
Yes. And like, yeah, there's some little structure to it because, like I said, the MC is trying to learn this fantasy language, and there's a few main sticking points to it or whatever. And you're just hearing the voice acting clips of just these nonsense words, and it's like, that is not Japanese. And it's like, okay, that's not English either. That's not any language I recognize. And that's what a huge chunk of the prologue is. And I'm like, oh my god, there's so many lines for this poor voice actress. And then from the second chapter on, they just give it up and they're like, okay, yeah, he's learned the language now, and all the voice actors are speaking Japanese. And
yeah, now you can stop pretending.
Yeah, exactly.
Translation enabled.
Exactly. And then once again, now we get that disconnect of hearing all the Japanese voices, especially right after the beginning, where they're really laying it on thick that, oh, hey, foreign land of this strange new language. And now it's like, okay, just go back to normalcy. To be fair, the alternative is I demand that everyone record 5 million lines in nonsense words. I think that's asking a little too much. I don't.
Yeah, slightly.
I don't think that's very reasonable. But still,
you know what? As a voice actor for this one title, you need to learn a garbled language.
Here's all of my gibberish that I've written for the script. You must recite it perfectly.
Oh God.
Oh my gosh. It was really novel, though. It was very unique.
That's true.
Super cool. But it was unsustainable. But I think that's a great, display of language in visual novels. The great display of, not just languages in the sense that whether we're reading English or Japanese or whatever else, but just the idea of language within the story and how it's getting communicated to us, the reader.
Fair enough. And I wanted to now jump to a second point. How the language is used in VNs, sometimes as a narrative device, something to be overcome or deciphered. So some sort of an ancient dialect, some sort of lost text, and you need to find either a translator or a cipher to decipher such message. And most commonly, this is some sort of an find in an explorating event, maybe in a tomb, a pyramid. Oh my God, the Alisoft is known for their love of crazy pyramids, let me tell you. And it always takes me back. So I make a small tangent. Long time ago, back when I had Windows 3.11 system, I played a game called Commander Keen. That was a very old game, run on DOS or Windows 3.11. And I remember this was the first time I've had a game that I put up in English, yet by playing, I couldn't understand what is happening because a lot of instructions have been written in complete garbage, in something garbled. And slowly but surely I was finding patterns because it was a platformer of some sorts, but every single level ended with the same 4 letters. And one moment I had an epiphany. Is that exit? And I started noting down letter to symbol. And that was the first game in my life that I deciphered by looking through commonalities in words, trying to decipher what would be in English and try to assign those to symbols. That was the first game ever that I did that. And to this day, in VNs, it is such a rare occasion when they grant you an opportunity to create your own cipher and try to work with language. And the one that it comes back to me all the time, and this is the second example I prepared and comes to me all the time, is Yotsunoha. It featured, and let me find the name of it, because I keep forgetting, fortune-telling method that you use in high school to divine whether or not 2 people are compatible, they romantically, right? And it's called Akitsu-tsuneko. And you have to calculate by converting names into numbers, some values, and those values represent whether relation between those two people. So you have a name A, name B, convert all of those to numbers in some algorithmic way, and that answers the question A relation B and B relation A. And it was very interesting because at that moment in that VN, I completely paused. I said, fuck it, nope, stop, pen and paper, let's do it. And I not only solved for the two names of the protagonist and the heroine of her route, but also possible variation and permutation of their names. And by doing so, I understand what would be the drama. Because I saw that if you use the nicknames or shortened version of their name, the interpretation completely changes. And I saw already that there will be one perspective of the protagonist or heroine that they will take different names. And one result was that the protagonist doesn't like her and she likes protagonist. And the other interpretation was that they like each other, or maybe one loves one another, something like that. Completely different result based upon just whether or not it was nickname, shortened version, longer version, first name, second name, etc. Very cool thing. Man, I had so much fun deciphering this game to understand what's the drama about.
When you deciphered it, it was like it was utilizing Japanese, right? Because you mentioned like off their names. So I guess you could say the aspects of their names, the characters.
The game provides you the algorithm how to do it. All you needed to do is follow the steps.
Ah, nice.
And follow the steps to get the result. Obviously, the way I did it is instead of only checking the full name of the protagonist and the full name of the heroine, I also took all the variations between their nicknames and last name to check how the result will change.
Mm-hmm.
That was the drama.
Did you check any of the other heroines? The main character with anyone else?
You know what? I don't remember.
Oh, you monster. How could you?
But now that you say, I need to check that because I have a feeling it will be Emer dislikes when Tauros speaks, and the Tauros has to be quiet when Emer speaks. Something like that would be, right?
Not even close. Get out of here. You know, okay, you're done. Now it's me. Because the funny thing is you're talking about the ciphers and stuff, and I'm glad you liked all that stuff, but there was one cipher I remember reading that kind of killed the whole route. And specifically, it was for the fan disc for Sharen no Kuni. That fan disc was pretty interesting because half of it was like, I guess you could say a sequel story to the original, and the other half of it was just composed of individual heroine routes. You could just pick you could basically pick which canon you want to follow of main character hooking up with which heroine, and then it would continue off that with some lighthearted-ish story and some, that's how fan discs are. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
One heroine route was entirely about solving a cipher. Basically, they were doing house cleaning, going through the past and finding, oh man, here's a letter from the past to ourselves in the future, and for us to use a cipher to decode some of its aspects, and that tied it into following some sort of treasure hunt in the future. Unfortunately, this cipher involved hiragana, which is part of the Japanese language.
Oh.
And this was not translated in any form into English. The translators just did it literally, which was basically just referring to specific characters and specific hiragana and stuff. And so if you, the English reader, didn't know anything about hiragana, you were completely lost. And I suppose in some sense, like to a reader like you, who would have immediately dived into Wikipedia and researched the basics of Japanese language, I'm sure to you,
no idea.
you would have loved this.
I'm like, you need to tell me you need to tell me which title it is so I will avoid it, because I already know that it will take way too much time for little to no payoff.
You would immediately dive into it, and you'd learn all of the basics involving this. You'd get yourself caught up to speed, and you'd immediately start poking into the various possibilities and trying to assemble together the, I guess, vocabulary in Japanese to explore all the possibilities. And it's like, okay, yeah, MR, you would have liked this and stuff. But I did not. And I was totally lost. And since the entire route plot revolved around this cipher, it just all went completely over my head. And that killed a lot of my enjoyment with it, because obviously I had no clue what they're talking about, and I had no clue where they were going.
That's really funny, because I have a funny example of how I got angry at a cipher that I want to also bring to the conversation. Although it wasn't from VN, it was from an RPG. But since you brought your example, I want to bring one as well, because there is some sort of computer panel that requires you to input a password, and to get a password that is a sequence of numbers, you need to solve what is called a simultaneous equation model with 4 variables. And that was...
Oh, wow, that's a lot.
That was back in, I would say, between elementary and middle school. So that was very... not straightforward to me, so I just brute forced by trying to swap some numbers around and trying to figure out how it works, okay? But ultimately, by sheer luck or just my persistence, I got it. I got all 4 variables. I can input the code. I input the code and the game says, wrong password. I was so fucking angry. It took me so many hours. Like, I don't know. I don't precisely remember now. And I'm absolutely sure that it worked. I've been so pissed the entire freaking day that it wasted my time. I have the correct password. Get me in. Okay. So I resume playing, and a couple minutes later, on one of the scraps of paper or laurel laying on the ground, it says, oh yeah, for the security reason, I reversed the password. Oh, and it worked. It worked. So that game got me. I was so pissed in that moment. Oh my God.
Oh no. You thought you were just too good for this, and the developers were like, aha, I'm gonna sucker punch anyone who thinks he could skip ahead here.
I was losing my mind. I checked so many times whether or not the solution is correct for the simultaneous equation model. Yes, it was, and it doesn't work.
Oh no.
What's going on?
Oh,
type it in reverse, like, oh my God, how the fuck do I know? I was so angry. Oh my God.
I thought this was going to be one of those situations like, well, yes, you got a correct solution, but it wasn't the solution that the developers wanted. And it's like, because that happens sometimes. You think, okay, I've got an answer, and this works. And then you keep trying it, and the story's like, nuh-uh. And then it's like, okay, well, fine. I guess I'll just play at your slow, stupid pace. And then the game wanted you to go about it a different way. And it's like, okay, well, the way I had it would have worked too. Poor Ace Attorney falls victim to this a lot.
Now that you mentioned playing not necessarily in a way the game wants, there was, I think it was called South Park: The Stick of Truth. They have one moment in which you need to input a password, and the story has to progress for you to get that password. And it just so happens I reverse engineered what the password will be by looking at the options and thinking, okay, what would Cartman say? I inputted exactly the correct password, and the game says, are you a cheater or a speedrunner? Don't do it, just play the game. That's what the game told me. Like, what the hell?
Well, yeah. A South Park game is going to have a very different approach than a lot of other video games.
Fair enough.
You found that out the hard way. But anyways, yes, back to the whole point about language. Is that, yeah, with ciphers, And with the whole aspect of fan translations and official translations, you tend to run into some snags. And I mean, sometimes you can handle it, I guess you could say, fairly well, but when you get an incidents like with Shade no Kuni fan disc, then it ruins my enjoyment a lot. And besides, even if the translators had made a completely, English version of this word puzzle for them to solve, for them to work through along the way, it still would have rubbed me the wrong way because, like I said earlier, there's this disconnect now of a clearly Japanese story with these Japanese characters in a fictionalized Japanese setting are now talking about English. And I can hear the voice actors talking in Japanese. And again, that's too many just layers of disconnection between me and reading this story and trying to get engrossed in believing everything that's going on here. So honestly, I kind of feel a little bad because this was sort of a no-win situation, I guess.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess there's just some ways that are slightly better than others, and I mean, to be honest, it would have been a lot of effort trying to come up with some sort of equivalent English cipher/riddle. So, no matter what, it's kind of rough.
Even riddles are very hard to translate, honestly, because I feel like whenever I've encounter another Alice of Pyramid with another freaking riddle, I'm losing my mind every single time. And don't worry, when we'll get the read part for this month, I'll definitely talk about another Alice of Pyramid that made me just go crazy. Every single time, those kind of puzzle with a very specific riddle, things like thinking out of the box, when it goes through even a translation effort of just guessing the correct answer is just such a pain often. But still, nonetheless, I'm so eager whenever I see some sort of a sequence of symbols, some sort of string of letters or glyphs. I'm like almost ready. And I vividly remember the trigger for this topic specifically is when I played Gears of Dragoon, and they have a tomb, an ancient tomb of the previous civilizations, and they are translating it. There are some Egyptian-looking glyphs, and I'm immediately Googling, right, on my Wikipedia, and honestly, they just posted complete garbage on the murals. And funnier still, one of the symbols on that mural is just a company logo. They just put the company logo on ancient tombs. Like, okay, that's actually funny.
Oh
in a way.
my gosh, it's the sacred symbol of the gods above. It's just the company logo.
Yeah, exactly. Very meta. Very meta in a way.
Oh, that's funny. If I was a video game dev, I'd absolutely do that.
Yeah. Okay, that made me chuckle.
But thank you everyone for listening in. This was very interesting because there's a lot of different angles that readers, translators, and even developers can get in on how they incorporate language into the story and trying to make it consistent with what the reader experiences as well. So it is a very tricky topic. So hopefully you all enjoyed.
Exactly. And please, if you have any examples of an interesting language permutation using a VN, share it in the comments. And with that, venture out.
Venture out.